Hello, everyone. So in the last unit, we ended by discussing about the downfalls of debt and the dangers of borrowing. And at this point, you might feel like, how the heck do I even borrow in a smart way at all? Well, today we're going to introduce you to a few strategies that might help you do that so that you can become a smart borrower. So the first thing you'll want to do when borrowing money or taking out a loan is to assess whether you're making an informed and financially literate decision. You want to figure out whether this debt might put you into a bad situation or whether it'll make you tight on personal finances. You want to make sure that you can still live comfortable even though you're borrowing. So, in order to determine this, you can use something that we call the 2010 rule. The 2010 rule states that, first of all, the total amount of money borrowed should be less than 20% of your annual net income. And second of all, the total of your monthly payments that you make should be less than 10% of your monthly net income. Now, you must remember that the 2010 rule is not a rigid, hard, and fast thing to do, and it's usually just used as a reference point. However, it can be really helpful so that you don't end up finding yourself drowning in debt. Now, another thing you'll want to keep in mind when you're borrowing is that by borrowing now, you're taking away money from your future self, not just the borrower. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say that you borrow $200 from your friend Dan today. Eventually, you're going to have to pay back that $200 in addition to interest over the few months. Now, let's say that your next paycheck is going to be $300. Some amount of money from that paycheck is going to go into paying back your loan. In other words, you're taking away money from your future self by borrowing today. So, the reason why we're looking at this 2010 rule is to make sure that even though you're paying back a payment and that's coming out of your paycheck, you still have enough money or income left for your other daily needs and wants in order to live comfortably. And finally, another essential thing to do in order to be a smart borrower is to always ask yourself some questions before you take a loan. So these questions include, first of all, will borrowing help me invest in something I want or something I need? For example, a few units ago, we discussed this idea where you really wanted a pair of new shoes, and as a result, you were willing to borrow $100 from your friend now and then pay it back later. That, for example, is a want, and it's not necessarily a need. You want to ask yourself if this borrowing is actually going to help you invest in something that you need. So, for example, if you're borrowing money to buy a house, that might be, in fact, quite helpful, especially because that house can accrue in a value and you could eventually perhaps sell it for even more money. The next thing you want to ask yourself is whatever I want to invest or buy in worthwhile? Will I still be using this commodity or working on this startup after a period of time? If you just end up realizing that you're going to borrow this, use it, and then be done with it, then maybe it's not a great use of taking that time to borrow and then pay it back. Again, you want to make sure that this is an investment that's worthwhile. The next question you want to ask yourself is, what are the downsides to not purchasing this item or service? This can help you determine whether it's really worth it. If you find that the downsides for not purchasing this item are not actually that big of a deal, then perhaps you don't borrow. But if you realize that yes, it's going to have a lot of consequences on your life, then that might justify borrowing more. Finally, you'll also want to ask yourself, what expenses would I be minimizing in order to pay off this loan? And when the time comes, would I be financially comfortable enough to repay the sum I drew out? So hopefully these questions, as well as the 2010 rule, and keeping in mind the whole idea of how borrowing is taking away money from your future self, can help you make sure that you're making smart borrowing decisions. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.